Welcome to some optional video content for Module 215, Advanced Behavior Management. In this very brief video, I want to introduce the concept of differential reinforcement and specifically talk about the ALTAR and DRO programs. This video is designed to try and help reduce some of the anxiety that students have because of the sort of technical sounding language here. So hopefully I'll give you an introduction that helps to simplify things. But what this video is not intended to do is replace the need to do the readings. Those you'll still need to do, and they include a lot more detail and content than I'll be covering in this video. So let's begin by talking about a differential reinforcement. What does that mean? Well, it simply means something we've talked about before, that we're going to choose what we want to see the person doing and call that a desired behavior. And we're going to identify the behavior that we don't want to see, the one that we're trying to reduce or eliminate. And we're going to call that the troublesome behavior. And we're going to differentiate between the two, making sure that we focus on rewarding the desired behavior and simply giving nothing or less in the way of rewards for the troublesome behavior. That's called extinction, when you remove all of the possible rewards. Sometimes, as we talked about, people's behavior is so deeply entrenched that we have to have some sort of logical or natural consequence. And in the literature, you might see that that's referred to as a cost or a response cost. The idea that something doesn't work for the person, it actually leaves them a little bit further behind. There are lots of different types of differential reinforcement schemes, and unfortunately in the literature, sometimes they change what the abbreviations sound like. But really it doesn't matter that much because they're all rooted in two very simple and different approaches, and that's what we're going to talk about. These approaches can be used to introduce a new behavior, such as when you're trying to teach a child toilet training, or to change the frequency of a current behavior, getting a child to do their homework more often, or getting a child to get out of bed less often in the middle of the night. And it can also be used to eliminate behaviors that simply don't have an easy replacement, like hitting a person. And the great thing about differential reinforcement is that it combines very well with all sorts of other techniques that we've been talking about, both pervasive and program techniques, from medical strategies to teaching to the way we communicate with people. They all go together. So you'll still need to read chapters 6 and 8, which deal with DRO and ALTAR programs. DRO program is a fancy way of saying differential reinforcement of other behavior. Now, I wish that they had maybe made the naming of both of these programs a little bit more common sense and simple. But what they're really saying here is that we're going to use this behavioral program format to get rid of a behavior or to at least significantly reduce a behavior that we don't have some automatic replacement for. The behavior is just simply not okay. Like, for example, hitting somebody. There are many, many things we might do to help a person improve so that they didn't hit somebody. For example, we might teach them coping methods. We might help them to have time for breaks and respite. We might give them some communication methods. We might deal with whatever underlies their hitting. Perhaps they're in pain or they're in some type of anxiety. However, doing all those things wouldn't immediately get rid of the hitting. So we also want to reward the person for basically going longer and longer periods of time without hitting, and that's a DRO. If they had really been smart, they would have called it rewarding the person for any other behavior besides the TV. What we're really saying to the person is, hey, you went for a period of time without using this problem behavior, and that's what's earned you the reward. In that period of time, the person could have done just about anything else as long as they didn't do the problem behavior. So this is called an interval-based system. We don't reward the person when we see them do a specific thing. We reward them at set times based on the fact that they didn't do something in that set time that was considered a troublesome behavior. But here's the tricky part, and here's why it's named the way it's named. We don't tell people, good job of not hitting somebody. If we did that, we'd constantly be reminding them of the behavior that used to work for them. So instead, we're going to give that set of behaviors that include everything except hitting a new name, such as being a good friend or being a gentleman. Now, I know, and you know, that being a good friend isn't specifically a behavior, but we want this person to think about a huge a set of behaviors that are acceptable and not include one thing in it. So we're going to use the power of generalization. And we're going to do that by choosing to go and check on them at set intervals. Now, the article gets into far more, or chapter gets into far more detail about this, but it describes something called the Goldilocks Rule that helps us to decide just how long that interval should be. So make sure that you pay attention to that and understand why it's called the Goldilocks Rule and how it works. It's really a basic and simple mathematical equation. On the other side of the equation is the alt-R. If you read chapter 8, it talks about the fact that it is sometimes referred to as a DRA. And I don't know why the authors didn't just simply call it that, but it's not important to us. It really is just about identifying a very specific desired behavior we want the person to use, and now we start rewarding them for doing that new behavior. So instead of trying to eliminate something, we're now trying to simply increase something. And by increasing it, the troublesome behavior will automatically go away. So for example, if a person is being taught to toilet train, every time a child goes and uses the potty is one less time that the child would use their diaper to eliminate. Or every time a child puts his hand up in class and waits for the teacher to help him is one less time he yelled out in class. And this is called the 100% rule. In other words, when you add up the TBs and the DBs, it equals 100% of the possible times that the individual has to behave. If we get them doing the DB more and more and more, that percentage, the part of that 100 that is used for the problem behavior is going to start to go down. So here we need to be able to identify a very specific alternative behavior. Instead of any other behavior, we're looking at one other behavior that can be a replacement. And this now is based on a ratio. In other words, we want to give a person a reward for doing the specific thing. And initially, the ratio is usually 1 to 1. Normally, we give one reward for every time we see one desired behavior. But as time passes, we're going to do something called fading. And fading simply means that we start to reduce the amount of rewards we give. So instead of giving a reward every single time, we might start to give it once out of every 3 times, once every 5 times, once every 7 times, and so on, until the person is doing the behavior simply because the behavior works for them and not because we're giving some additional reward. So in order to understand the 100% rule and the idea of ratio-based systems even more, you'll want to read the article, chapter 8. And what's really good about both of these chapters is that they describe a whole bunch of variations on intervals and ratios so that you can really make them fit the individual. Understanding this material is fundamental to using other techniques, such as the ones that reduce the interval between behaviors. It's really the same idea. And when you get really advanced, you can actually combine these two techniques. We're not going to worry about doing that in this module, but being super solid in these two ideas will be a foundation for all the other behavioral work you may do. All right, hopefully that's a good intro for you. And as always, don't be afraid to ask questions.